Welcome back to Radio Rothbard. I am joined this week not by our usual Ryan McMakin. He is at Freedom Fest. For those that listened last week, would know we had a great conversation last week about nationalism, which is going to be his topic on Christian nationalism. It's a broader point at Freedom Fest this week. So I am joined by my good friend, a Mises Fellow this year, Twitter's first and foremost defender of America's most prosecuted minority. It's a great Rothbard article out there for the fans of the show. Connor Mortell. Connor, how are you doing today?
I am absolutely fantastic. I've really been spending my whole life trying to build up to be Twitter's most defender of America's most persecuted minority, so I'm honored that that's our takeaway here. I am fantastic.
I have enjoyed your cigar posting in your summer in Auburn this year. So first and foremost, before we get into the topic of the day, which is going to be crushing the green lies and defending fossil fuels, a favorite topic of yours, what is it like to be a summer fellow at Rothbard Village for those who have not had that opportunity?
Oh, it is absolutely fantastic. So as you know, though, last summer I was an intern, so I kind of got to be a fellow-ish, where I got a little bit of the social experience, but I missed out on the more academic experience. It's incredible this year being a full fellow, spending my nights at Rothbard Village, like you said, having a cigar out in the parking lot, just chatting with the other fellows about God knows what any given night. It is one of the coolest experiences in the world at one of the coolest places in the world.
Yeah, there is nothing quite like Rothbard Village, and any students out there that are thinking about pursuing a graduate degree, they should definitely look for next year's opportunities. But that is not the purpose of today's show. We are going to save some of that propaganda for later, though do have a great Radio Rothbard mug that both of us are enjoying today.
Absolutely.
You can get yours at Mises.org/Rothmug. And I think we've got a special there with Rothpod as the coupon code. But so the topic of the day is fossil fuels and the politicalization of energy markets and the consequences that it has. And this is a topic that you are researching as a fellow, correct?
Yes, it is. My original topic was more empirical stuff, and it's turning lately, thanks to great Dr. Mark Thornton, into a more stylized history of fossil fuels and economics.
Excellent. Well, let's kind of start with some of the basics here. Because, obviously the energy debate is something that has been at the forefront of the political conversation for quite a while now. And even within libertarian circles, there tends to be sort of a reflexive, pushback to fossil fuels, to traditional fuel sources, hydrocarbons. I know some people don't like the fossil fuel label, and that's okay. But often you'll get sort of a libertarian response to some of the more obvious, heavy-handed government intervention sort of arguments in terms of this field, and trying to kind of argue from a position that, if it wasn't for the state, then we would have this incredible innovative environment for green fuels. We would have more solar panels on roofs. We would have a lot more wind energy and the like. And I know that from your perspective, and I know that you've been inspired by the work of Alex Epstein, who was on the Human Action podcast, I believe, last year, kind of breaking down his most recent book, Fossil Future. But can we kind of start there as a talking point on why are you interested in particular in fossil fuels and sort of defending traditional energy sources, rather than taking the perspective that, it's the state that has prevented sort of a green revolution within this field?
Well, I definitely agree with you. There is a reflexive movement even among libertarians for that kind of argument. And in fact, until Alex Epstein was on the Human Action podcast last year, I was actually working on getting my house solar powered. So that was what I was in the middle of doing when that episode aired. And I saw that episode, immediately ordered the book behind me and the other book behind me. They're both by Alex Epstein. It's Fossil Future and the Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And I was completely overwhelmed by his arguments. It shifted my worldview completely on it. And as far as the particular argument about regulation goes, I went for, I don't know if it was for a Mises Wire article or if it was for one of the things I'm doing for my summer fellowship, but I went at one point to download just the Department of Energy regulations currently on the books that offer incentives for green energy. So an artificial market pushing demand for green energy. And when I just tried to download the list of names of regulations that do that, it crashed my entire computer trying to download that list of names. So this mindset that it's just this regulated market that helps fossil fuels, and in a natural market it really would lead to green energy, that's not really accurate. At the end of the day, a lot of the regulation out there, most of the regulation out there, is pushing against fossil fuels, and in a less regulated market, we would see much more fossil fuels, not less of them.
And I think the energy conversation is an important one because it's something that is the economic impact involved there is so very broad in terms of the way that has a direct connection to all levels really of our economic activity, our quality of life. When we just consider just how much we have become dependent upon energy sources, and I think that the broadness of it, just how surrounded we are by the virtues of basically power on demand, it is easy to kind of take some of this stuff for granted. And so the consequences here of so we kind of have two issues. One is a broader conversation for what a energy, what is the best way of powering society. And the second one is the consequences of the regulation of energy policy, the interventions in energy policy, the extent that it can be used for political tyranny in a variety of forms. And it kind of reminds me to the extent to which the consequences from, say, fiat money, right? The way that there's so many different areas in which, while we can talk about inflation, we can talk about different consequences from interest rate manipulation and the like. We can talk about booms and busts. The extent to which fiat money, some of those inflationary measures don't take into proper account the substitution for inferior goods or inferior goods for superior goods. So, I think within this kind of interesting political moment right now where there's a lot of energy in terms of kind of questioning a lot of the major industries within this country in a way that I think is obviously born in large part due to a heightened perception of say, like public health tyranny. But the reason why people are interested in, say, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s message about skepticism of big pharma, concerns out there in terms of the quality of food in this country, and seed oil disrespecting and that whole genre within itself. All of these big direct attacks on industries that Americans have taken for granted, have been happy to consume in a variety of forms. The longer term ramifications here are quite, are definitely something we're studying and something we should not trust government credentialed experts to tell us the full story on. It's similar in terms of energy policy where, the substitution for, it's not simply about price per se, but the substitution of certain qualities of energy relative to, fossil fuels and sort of the traditional fuel sources and things like that. And I know obviously this is something that Epstein does a great job of, I think, focusing on with his work. So can you outline that dynamic where when we think about energy, it's not simply, say, the power that you get from a solar panel versus what you might get from, your traditional energy grid, but the different qualities and aspects of energy sources that need to be factored into this broader conversation.
Absolutely. So first, I really agree with you comparing it to like the fiat money conversation. In fact, my office mate here at the Institute is doing his research on MMT, modern monetary theory. And he and I go back and forth a lot. Mises used the term once, luxury beliefs, that a lot of these things are luxury beliefs where the people arguing against fossil fuels or against gold standard type currency are standing on the backs of the benefits of fossil fuels and gold standard type currencies, and they have these luxury beliefs that they can only have because of the benefits of the pre-existing fossil fuels, good currency, and what have you. As for what you just said about the other costs and whatnot that we don't always think of not just the cost of a solar panel versus the cost of fossil fuel, I've actually got something coming out on this on the Mises Wire soon, where recently Joe Biden bragged about the fact that wind and solar are now officially cheaper than fossil fuels. First and foremost, that's not true. But secondly, even if that were true, what it misses is that there are background costs beyond that. Epstein explains it saying that anytime you see the cost of solar and wind being lower, it's places where the actual costs of energy are highest because it's more than just the unit of solar versus the unit of coal. For solar, you need a means of storing the energy that fossil fuels have far and beyond better than their alternatives. And then beyond that, there are also the two major components of diluteness and intermittency. So at the end of the day, to account for the same amount of fossil fuel energy that you get in a solar or wind option, you would need to thoroughly expand the solar or wind farm far beyond the impact you would expect from fossil fuels. And then the intermittency is really where it gets you, where a lot of the time they measure the reliability of energy based on its average requirement. But then we see things like Texas a few winters ago, where they started shifting to green energy. But when you base its reliability on its average necessity, it's going to become completely intermittent when you have its peak capacity, when it needs more energy than average. And the only ways they go about solving such things are by backing up the green energy sources with fossil fuels. So they can only account for these other costs of these energies, the intermittency cost, by using more fossil fuels. So even when they move away from fossil fuels, they have to use it to cover the hidden costs you see that aren't just seen in price.
It reminds me, as a fellow Florida man, I know one of the issues you have when there is a major hurricane, like what happened last year with in Fort Myers. I know there was a big issue with Tesla cars, and the extent to which the battery technology of Tesla cars mixing with salt water that you get coming in from flood environments, it created a whole different sort of challenge than dealing with a traditional motor. And that that there are a variety of these secondary costs. Again, people losing their lives in Texas, in large part. I'm not going to say entirely. I'm not going to try to paint with an overly broad brush. But it turns out wind farms are not the most reliable form of energy when you're dealing with winter storms and things like that. And what's interesting as well is that if we can appreciate the propaganda game that the left or interventionists more broadly are so good at in terms of framing this debate, the entire notion of green kind of just projects this notion that the environmental costs for these alternative energy sources are self-obvious pluses here. And yet when we think about the trade-offs, the unseen dynamic there, whether it is the disposal of wind turbines and the like, when it's the disposal of various other aspects that go into a push towards electric vehicles and all of that, when it goes into the increases in the use of traditional power grids as a result of charging up your Tesla and the like, this aspect of the seen and the unseen, again, not surprising that politicians kind of waving a green flag are ignorant of that. They're ignorant of the unseen and a variety of other things they advocate, not just this field. But it seems very much this dynamic of the seen, the unseen, and if throw Dr. Byland a bone, even the unrealized, definitely plays a role in this larger energy discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another one of the big things is we as far as the unseen goes, is all this stuff that happens in the rest of the capital structure, which is something we as Austrians believe or should understand better than most because it's one of the few things that we have in such a manner that no other school of economics really even can relate to is that we really look at the whole structure of production. A lot of the people, when they're having the economics conversation, or not the economics, the energy conversation, they're thinking about powering their car and powering their house, and the conversation ends there. They ignore the unseen. What they forget is that every single step of the structure of production was fueled by fossil fueled machine labor. So you think about like the hurricane example you just used, not only were the Teslas struggling with that, but also the very reason that many houses are able to stand today in a way that they wouldn't have, say, 100 years ago in Florida, is because we have such better ability to build their houses through fossil fueled machine labor. And the car itself that you're driving was built with fossil fueled machine labor. So it's not just the air conditioning in your house, it's the entire house itself that was built on fossil fuels. And you have to go back through the entire structure of production to really see the unseen and unrealized effects of fossil fuels, or unrealized if they were regulated and kept away, what would be happening if not for this entire structure being fueled by a much more ultra cost effective energy. Meanwhile, on the topic of Teslas, I will say I actually had a conversation with my dad this week. He just bought a Tesla, so I've been telling him that he's betrayed me and I can't come home for Thanksgiving anymore.
Right, he needs to get at least a fossil fuel friendly license plate, like our friend Thomas Massey has with his Tesla.
Yes.
The other, I think interesting dynamic there is that the same sort of political mentality that thinks it can completely recreate the underlying energy system within this country simultaneously has very increasingly aggressive pursuits for other large scale feats of political will. Obviously, as in connection with the energy discussion, there is the favorite tool used by interventionists, which is the concerns over climate change, and its various other labels. For one, I mean, we could talk about just the reality of, I know Bob Murphy and others have done a great job of highlighting the extent to, well, where if the concern is extreme weather events, yet you have fewer people being killed as a result of fewer weather events, kind of some of the underlying arguments there. And we'll talk a little bit about the anti-human dynamic of this here shortly. But you had an article recently in response to some of the plans out there that are seem to be growing increasingly serious, which is itself very concerning. Taking straight out of a comic book villain plot of the attempts to regulate the sun itself on this Earth, which kind of seems an interesting dynamic there with the going hand in hand with a love for solar power.
Yeah, so that one was I was like I said, my research here has been turning more into a stylized history of energy, and as such, I was just going through trying to look at timelines of various energy sources, and whenever you look at a timeline of solar energy, the first step is always like Grug walked out of cave, felt sun was hot. But then it skips a few hundred years and gets to more than a few hundred years, but it gets to the 6th century Justinian Code where they actually did regulate that every person had a right to the sun. And I remember reading that and I was talking with my office mate and I was like, it's so funny. This sounds ridiculous when you and I sit here reading it today, but it's not that far off from a lot of the things that people calling for solar panels really want. And there are a lot of regulations where we start hearing comic book level villains trying to call for such regulations, and they make it on predictions that the world is ending and therefore we all need this right to the sun. And in fact, on that note, we are just a few weeks out of the 5-year anniversary of Greta Thunberg telling us we have 5 years left to stop using fossil fuels or it's all over. So the good news is either way, it's too late now. We may as well use what we've got. But we do get these comic book villains making such claims that are not that far off from the 6th century Justinian Code saying every person must have a government mandated right to the sun. It's not that far off from the claims we hear today.
And that, as we mentioned earlier, some of the anti-human dynamics, which I think are, whether it is a desire for mandating medical decisions, whether it is some of the stuff going on with the food supply, there is the specter of this very sort of clear, population control, anti-human thriving dynamic that seems so completely baked into a lot of the prevailing ideologies of various aspects of the left, and this takes various different types of forms out there. But you have another article recently on The Wire about the extent to which fossil fuels help us better fight fires and environmental disasters, based off the title of your article. But there is this larger component that, along with the extent to which humans are becoming better acclimated to dealing with different weather environments out there generally, and that can lead to a larger conversation about this element that is often overlooked by this conversation. I know it's something that Epstein focuses on a great deal within his work, and some of that has, I think a bit of a kind of lowercase o objectivist sort of framework, which I know that his philosophical background comes from. I'm not going to try to lump him in with Leonard Peikoff and Yaron Brooks, who would be pro nuclear bombing. So some of these actors here, but this larger this blindness to the question of ultimately what is the aim of society. Is it the preservation of the earth for the extent of preserving the earth as an inherent good in itself? Or is it the degree to which the consequences of the decisions we make as a society go to the well-being of humans individually? And so, if you overly simplify it even to the dynamic to which, if you fully bake into even the narratives about the consequences of CO2, you don't question the underlying science to make the point that if there's a trade-off here between innovation and economic advancement and prosperity towards on one side, and on the other side, the inability to feed and house and allow for human beings to actually be human beings, to think freely, to create, to prosper, to have families and the like. This human element is something that is often lacking outside of when they try to take a news clip here and talk about how the plight of this one made for TV Twitter viral thing can all be accumulated to climate change and our refusal to tax carbon. This human dynamic is, I think, an important one, going really straight to exactly what are we talking about when it comes to energy policy, environmental policy, however you want to frame this debate.
Yeah, the human element of it all is enormous, and it's probably the most ignored factor by the people opposed to fossil fuels or hydrocarbons, as you were saying. Alex Epstein describes that the current system tends to evaluate energy from an anti-impact framework. The major problem with an anti-impact framework, though, is that human beings are impactful. Full stop. Human beings really shouldn't be able to survive, and certainly shouldn't be able to flourish the way we have on our Earth. The Earth is not sufficient for human survival. It is dangerous to human survival. We should not have made it this far. The reason we're able to make it this far is that we have tools, and we're able to use tools, and we are able to impact the Earth in such a way that we can make it livable for us. And the ultimate tool we've ever come across that does that is that of fossil fuels. It has, like you said, I've got an article up talking about the way fossil fuels help fight off environmental disasters. I talk a little bit about Alex Epstein as he talks about how fossil fuels are used to prevent forest fires and used to fight forest fires when they come. We talked earlier about the way fossil fuels are used to build stronger structures that allow for us to be safe during hurricanes. You mentioned Bob Murphy's work on the actual climate-related deaths over the last 100 years, and Alex Epstein talks about that too. He shows climate-related deaths have gone down 98% in the last 100 years. And if you were looking at any of this through a pro-human perspective, you would have to engage with those things. You'd have to engage with the way fossil fuels affect the structure of production. You'd have to engage with all the ways that humans have benefited from fossil fuels. And if you're ignoring these benefits, then you're not looking at it from a human perspective. You're just trying to attack the impacts when you're ignoring all of the demonstrable benefits that human beings have had from the proliferation of fossil fuels.
Absolutely, I think that's why Tom Del I think one of his favorite lines is green watermelons, because they're green on the outside and red on the inside. And of course, this goes directly to the extent to which once you allow for the ability to tax all these very aspects that go into that can become broadly lumped into the mantle of combating climate science, whether it is taxing carbon, which is often kind of thrown out there as a more free market approach to this. That there are, in terms of dealing with pollution, dealing with, the environmental impact, and particularly the impact that the activity of some people can have on others. One of the things that comes to mind from our perspective is Murray Rothbard's framework in terms of dealing with pollution from a property rights perspective. And yet, those sort of attempts, that sort of framing, dealing with these sort of things are obviously do not have a lot of interest within these conversations from those promoting it. It seems ultimately, you can look at, if you consider the Green New Deal, for example, and you actually read through, it's so, often these are large money pots for various forms of left-wing patronage, including, reparations for climate justice and the like. And so what would your perspective be, for one, on the extent to which the Green Agenda allows for, kind of an explicit political authoritarianism dynamic, but what, as well as someone who is informed by kind of Rothbardian political economy and respect for property rights, what framework do you see there as valuable in terms of your own research in some of these things?
So David Gordon talked about it the Rothbard graduate seminar this few weeks ago, that Rothbard had a tendency when he was arguing to really use the phrase "that's not correct," and even if it is, so what? And I think that comes a lot to this, where when you have that argument from the Rothbardian perspective, it's Rothbard absolutely answers pollution through a private property framework across the board, and it, coupled with the other topics we've talked about today, works really well. You can say, when someone's having that, well, private property couldn't answer pollution argument, it's one, that's not true, as Rothbard has shown. It can answer pollution. In fact, there are many ways private property can handle pollution. And two, even if that were true, so what? Because the benefits of fossil fuels outweigh the costs in such a way that it lets us handle pollution better by producing more fossil fuels. So it's kind of that same 1-2 punch of Rothbard shows it's true that private property can handle it, and arguments like Epstein show that even if private property couldn't handle it, it's really not a hit on a private property claim, because it could still proliferate energy in such a way that it could answer the problems of pollution, even if it couldn't answer the problem itself of creating pollution, which again it can.
Yeah, that's again going back to Bob Murphy's work, who I've probably read most of in terms of the economics of climate change. There's a lot of even fascinating dynamic there, where even if you accept the own estimates from climate change alarmists, there's plenty of evidence that there's actually a positive economic impact from a level of global warming, just in terms of dealing with the economic costs of the cold rather than the heat, and yada yada yada. And again, I'm not here to make my own independent judgments on that. I'm just here to talk about it and talk about the work of others. But it is interesting, even from those own dynamics, where the attempt to actually prove a harm, that the science is not settled, even from their own perspective on some of these things. And but again, that goes to some of the nuances there that are not all that compelling if your goal is to simply push a larger government program. Now, I'm sure, Connor, that we have people listening right now who think that it is that we are missing a very important part to this conversation, and that there is one obvious dynamic where a free market might provide a better source of energy, and that's obviously the question of nuclear power. And so, can you talk a little bit about, if we look beyond sort of the niche projects that are most commonly associated with, say, green political movements and wind and solar and the like, and rather towards, greater energy innovations that have proven to be able to support and replace reliance upon traditional fuel sources. How does energy innovation work into some of your work?
So nuclear power is a really interesting one because even Alex Epstein admits it's probably the source of energy that will eventually replace fossil fuels. The problem in nuclear power is it is almost as hated by the green energy crowd as fossil fuels are, because on the list of anti-impact, nuclear power has the next most impact after fossil fuels. So a lot of the hate that fossil fuels get, nuclear also gets, and there's a lot of criticism of its safety and whatnot. I actually have to say, back when I worked for the Florida House of Representatives, I was blessed that our local Florida Power and Light lobbyist took us on a tour of our local nuclear power plant, and it was unbelievably safe in my experience. I mean, I'm not an expert on nuclear, so I was just getting what my own eyes saw. But when I came in, I had a pocket knife in my back pocket, and I set off the metal detector, and the jail cell came in, and a man showed up with an AR-15 holding me out until they could clear that it was just a pocket knife. I got inside and I was like, wow, this security is intense. And they said, well, yeah, we actually have a team of retired SEALs attack the facility every 6 months to make sure it's still secured, and they've never broken through a security. And then better yet, after 9/11, they flew a plane into the plant with it all powered down, and the falling debris was the only threat to the people on the plant, was the falling debris of the plane. So the nuclear attacks are somewhat misinformed, where they try and describe it as unsafe. They like giving the Chernobyl horror story. But what the strongest attack on nuclear is, and it's not even an attack, it's just why it's not quite there yet, is just that fossil fuels have had a lot more time to develop their technology, and as such, right now, they are more efficient. There is a very real world where nuclear could potentially one day win out, but there's one of two answers on that. If nuclear does have the capacity to become a more energy efficient source than fossil fuels, then we should, in the meantime, be proliferating fossil fuels to support that possible outcome. We should use the most efficient energy source we have to build on the next most efficient energy source. And if it turns out that it's inevitably not going to be true that nuclear has that ability to become more efficient than fossil fuels, then that's all the more reason to still proliferate fossil fuels. So in the meantime, while fossil fuels are still our most efficient energy source, we should be proliferating their use to the best of our ability, even if they won't always be, they are today, and as such, we should still be doubling down on them.
And that's kind of one of the interesting dynamics, is that as the climate change dynamic has kind of conquered and captured this broader conversation about energy policy, we've seen, particularly within Europe, and part of this obviously sparked by other issues such as the consequences from the tsunami and Japan's nuclear reactor back in the early 2010s. But at the time where we were seeing a decrease in nuclear energy capacity within Europe, this is something that one of the most successful ideologically driven political projects has been the rise of explicit green parties throughout Europe, not just simply one nation, and there's certainly a lot more teeth there than they are with the Green Party you might think of from an American context. But these are political parties that have been able to capture a large number of parliamentary seats, have been able to form coalitions with majority governments, have been able to really throw some weight around, and as a result, we've seen a decrease in energy capacity within a variety of states or countries within Europe. And of course, that has now created this very interesting dimension when we deal with the geopolitical consequences of the conflict with Ukraine and Russia, the way that that disrupted outside energy sources coming into Europe, that have created challenges in dealing with winters and the like, where even some of the green political trends have been rolled back. You even have green politicians saying, okay, well, maybe we should pause this, right? I want to have heat in the winter more than I want this political project to continue through. It's a, what element do you think, I think it's one of those things where, again, as we mentioned earlier, it's so easy to take these power sources for granted. It's only when there is a challenge to it, whether it be as a temporary result of a weather event or whether it is a geopolitical event that disrupts other reliable forms of energy sources, that it seems that there's nothing that can help push back against the regime's narrative quite like the necessity of needing energy sources that are being demonized out there. And so what are your what are your thoughts in terms of this broader conversation going on? I know that, again, even within, you can talk to someone who might consider themselves an edgy new right person, and yet as soon as you get to energy policy, they still kind of adapt sort of a green aesthetic. How do you think is the best way to go about sort of communicating this alternative view of the energy debate, given this sort of current political environment?
So you're definitely right that the best way is an energy crisis, but we like not getting to the energy crisis. I'm sitting here in Auburn, Alabama, in the middle of July, and you've been in the Mises Institute here. It's not exactly warm in here, despite being Alabama. It's probably 60 degrees in here, and it'd be easy to sit at this keyboard and say, "Oh, we need green energy right now," when I'm sitting in the nice air-conditioned room. But at the end of the day, when you're in Northern Europe and you don't have energy, suddenly you get much quicker to argue for fossil fuels. The answer Epstein gives is he calls it argue to 100, to come with a completely uncompromising argument saying we need to not just accept fossil fuels as they are, as the best we've got, and we've got them now, so we may as well use them. He says you have to double, triple down and push for more fossil fuels and really recognize that, look, when you have these fights, you're going to compromise most of the time anyway. And when you start at, it's the best we've got, and we're going to use what we have, but we're not going to use any more of it, you're going to compromise at using less. And Epstein calls for, no, from the get-go, you have to call stronger, we need more, we need more, we need more. And in fact, long before Alex Epstein said that, I have this on my desk that I keep every day here at the Institute, a great man took an uncompromising view by the name of Lew Rockwell, who stated, "I am a sinner but unrepentant. You see, I don't practice environmentalism and I don't believe in it. I don't recycle and I don't conserve, except when it pays to do so. I like clean air, really clean air, like the kind an air conditioning makes. I like the bug-free indoors. I like development as in buildings, concrete, capitalism, and prosperity." So the real answer for what we need to do is have the bravery of Lew Rockwell and be willing to be that unrepentant sinner. And when the conversation comes up, and it is someone in a paleo-libertarian circle who's an edgy right-winger, like you said, on everything else, but suddenly says, whoa, I have no issue with that. We should use the energy we have. I'd say absolutely not. We have the most ultimate civilization-building energy source there's ever been at our fingertips, and we should continue diving unrepentantly into that energy source rather than trying to leave the best tool we've ever had just sitting at the table untouched.
Absolutely. And it's, we may not be hoping for energy crises to help spark an awakening, but maybe some of the politically created consequences in California with some of their, I would far trust the source of air conditioning in Alabama more than I would in certain parts of Gavin Newsom's state. So maybe some of those state-by-state level interventions can help spark more of that rebellion against the credo of the religious environmentalists. Well,
as a Floridian, I don't think there's any possible better scenario than sparking their interests by an energy crisis in California.
Well, this has been a fun conversation, Connor. I look forward to seeing you in person at Mises University. That'll be coming up soon. And if you want to, for listeners out there, Mises University is always available to watch live on our YouTube channel and other platforms. And if you are a Mises member, you can get the full virtual Mises U experience, which comes with a few additional goodies beyond the live streams. And also, if you're interested more in this topic, we have a new animated beginner series on fueling a freer future. I'm glad I got that one out without a mistake. And you can find that video as well as our other videos on foreign policy, inflation and the Fed, and kind of a broad overview on economics at the Mises Begins page at mises.org/begin. Connor, where can people find more of your work?
Well, honestly, the best place to find my work is just Mises.org. Go there, search my name, Connor Mortel. I've got a Twitter. I'm nothing particularly special, but at the end of the day, if somebody's looking for my work, I say find me at Mises.org.
There you go. Excellent. Well, this has been Radio Rothbard, 4th Bishop for Connor Mortel. Will be joined next week by Ryan McMakin. We'll catch up with him after Freedom Fest. We'll see you next week.